Today's episode is a conversation about the coronation. No, not the royal type. We're actually referring to a brilliant essay by Charles Eisenstein around COVID-19, or more importantly, the opportunity for change that sits on the other side of this experience. Now, the conversation is with a very good friend of mine, Carolyn Tate, who's the author of Conscious Marketing and The Purpose Project. We sat down and looked at this essay and discussed the essence, what it means to us as women and as business owners in this new world. And the challenge is there for you as well. How will you be and see the world differently when we come to the other side of this rather unusual experience? The invitation is there for change, and what does that look like for you? I hope you find this conversation as inspiring as we did. Building a business and life that blends contribution, fulfillment, and financial reward? Welcome to Your Next Chapter, the show for women in their 40s and beyond who are on this adventure. I'm Angela Rasmus, and I'm delighted you're here. Well, hello there, and welcome back to another episode of the Your Next Chapter podcast. We're up to 117, and today it's a really thoughtful, wide, expansive conversation you're about to listen in on. It's a conversation on the coronation, an essay by Charles Eisenstein that a very, very good friend and I have come across. And when we were reading it, it was so thought-provoking. It really opened up both our heads and our hearts. And we've been talking about this essay offline, and we decided, look, we really want to bring this conversation to more people, because the more people who talk about these sort of subjects and start the ripple and the wave of change, the better. So my lovely, lovely friend and colleague, Carolyn Tate, who is down in Melbourne, is here with me today so that we can open up our hearts and minds even further with this chat. Hello, my friend.
Hello, Angela. So excited about this conversation.
Me too. And I've actually, this essay, I originally found it through the mastermind that I'm in. One of the girls posted a link to the Rich Roll interview with Charles. And as I was listening to this interview and going, wow, my mind is like popping, there was the reference to the fact that it was an actual essay. And being a reader, I needed to go and find that. Snuggled down on the couch, was reading it, and I kept having to put it down and go, whoa, and really think, because it was just hitting such a nerve in me. And I actually sent it to my husband, my daughter, my son, and to many other people as well, and saying, this is something that really I want more people to read. Did it have the same sort of effect on you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a follower of Charles Eisenstein's work for quite some time, so I've always loved his, new thinking that is quite beyond, I think, the mainstream. So he's always been challenging. I've always loved him. I've got a bit of an intellectual crush on him, I must admit. And when I read the paper too, I can't even recall how I came across it, but I shared it with everybody as well, and have had numerous conversations with friends and different people about it, and what it really meant, and what we were being called to take from the essay and bring into this new world.
It's sort of one of those, the COVID-19 that we're all still in the midst of at the moment, the way that he has described it, it's like it's an invitation to change. I mean, there is so much that has happened that was so, I know the word's been used a lot, unprecedented in the last couple of months. And that opportunity, when you can get out from underneath the initial fear that it really seemed to generate, then you could see that there was actually great opportunity here to change, to not go back to the way things were. And so if you were thinking about how you would sort of distill the essence of the essay before we broaden out the conversation, how would you describe it?
Well, I think the premise of the essay is that humanity is actually at a crossroads, and it puts forward the idea that the old normal wasn't really working for so many of us in the world. And he's basically saying that there's an opportunity to create a new normal. And he asks us to sit in the not knowing and the uncertainty instead of rushing to return to what we had pre-COVID. And I think he's also asking us to consider what are the highest human values that we aspire to, Is it about longevity of life, or is it about quality of life? So he asks us to question, one, the response to COVID globally, but also, two, what kind of world we want to create as we emerge from the fear and the real worry about the future, I guess.
Yeah, and I like that idea of sitting in the unknowing, sitting in the uncertainty. I mean, the way that our human brains are wired is we hate uncertainty, and like we try and fill up that space, be it with thoughts or with action. And I know for myself, the one thing that I have really loved and enjoyed over the last 6 weeks, where life has definitely slowed down, is that very fact, that ability to actually take a breath. And what I found in terms of, the old normal, the busyness I just believed was just an inherent part of my life. I've actually recognized that was a bit of a story I was telling myself. There wasn't that need to be so frenetic all the bloody time. And that to me has been an enormous relief. And personally, that's one of my intentions, is to not allow myself to get back to that busyness. But one of my fears, I guess, is to get sucked back up into the action when the world wakes up again. Have you had anything similar?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think I've actually been fortunate enough to create a life for myself that isn't premised on busy. I think I have very little debt, very few overheads. I've kind of simplified and streamlined my life quite radically over the last few years, particularly. And so I feel like this is dropping me down to another layer again, which is still calling me to really assess some of the practices that I'd like to do more of, such as meditation, spending a lot more time in the garden, doing things like riding my bike a lot more, buying from local farmers instead of the local, Coles, Woolworths, eggs and things like that. So I think it's calling me to drop even further into something that I hopefully started a few years ago. So, yeah, I definitely have not subscribed to the busy badge for a long time, but I still feel like there's a lot of deeper work that I've been presented as an opportunity to dig into.
Yeah, and that's what we were talking about, the idea of sort of interpreting or reading this essay through the lens of women, from our perspective, from a female, a feminine angle. What do we see personally as the opportunities that are there? And also the other lens where I work primarily with micro and small and solo business owners, women in their 40s and beyond. And it's all about blending contribution and fulfillment and enjoying financial reward and being really anchored in and recognizing your own worth and value. That's a really important part of what I do. And so looking at this essay through those lenses is really important to me. And I believe from your side, when we've been chatting, obviously you're a woman as well, so there's something we got in common. But then the sort of clients that you work with are different. So talk about that. What do you think is the lens for you there?
Well, I guess I look at it from a women's lens, and rather than gender, it's about feminine traits and masculine traits. And I think what we're seeing emerge right now are the beautiful feminine traits that are going to create a new society. Our world's been predicated on the growth of the economy instead of the well-being of society, which is what the paper talks a lot about. And it takes us away from being a consumer to being a citizen. So I think getting back to the feminine versus masculine traits, both of those, feminine and masculine, both have positive and negative attributes, I guess, but what we're seeing is the rise of the positive feminine through this experience, and that is things like a return to neighbourliness, a return to compassion and kindness and love, a return to humanity, and I love this word communitarianism, which is really about how do we unite and harness what's good in community. And so these are generally feminine traits that are leading the way, and we're actually seeing that being shown in world leaders like Jacinda Ardern. And so from a woman's perspective, I really would love to see the feminine traits be the new values that form our global society, values of love and compassion, I think are really are the values that I think everyone would espouse to and would like to see a new world being led by them. So I think that's the opportunity. It's an opportunity for women to step forward. And, you know, in my work, I really have those two lenses of what would a woman do, what would love do is a good question I always ask myself. And then I try to put the other hat on, which is a business leader's hat, which, you know, we can talk a little bit about further. But, yeah, the feminine, women, redefining our values and then working out how we can drive society by those values seems like the biggest opportunity for all of us.
Yeah, and as we were talking about the other day, the idea that sometimes when we look at something as big as this, we think, how can I contribute? You know, I'm just me as an individual, but it's the ripple effect. If we all started walking through the world with love and compassion as the way that we both respond and build things, respond to situations, and the way that we build our businesses and our lives, my goodness, that, like, you can't escape the ripple effect, the domino effect. Every person you come across that's treated with love and compassion is far more likely to then do the same to the next person that they come across. And so we actually can spread this, and without a doubt. And that's one of the things that I saw a lot was there was a brilliant Facebook group called the Kindness Pandemic, which leapt up as a result. I can't remember. I remember that there was a woman who started it, but I can't remember where. But it was just people sharing the acts of love, compassion, and kindness that they were seeing around them all the time. And I think one of the beautiful things that this pandemic has created, this environment has created, is a recognition of the small things and what a difference they make. When I was, I guess, in the early days of when this was all going on, and none of us knew what was going to happen, though we never do, and I was feeling a bit fearful because I've got a husband who's definitely, you know, in the risky category, diving into that kindness pandemic and just reminding myself that essentially we are all friggin' fabulous human beings. And things like this brings out the best. Yes, it can bring out the worst, but I prefer to focus on where it was bringing out the best in people. And those stories, that love, that compassion, that kindness, elevating those as values that are valuable without doing too much of a tautology. I'd certainly love to see the world go that way. And when we look at the essay, and you and I, we've been highlighting bits all over the place, and, you know, Charles talks about, and right up in the third paragraph. So we'll put the link in the show notes, or you can also Google and find this essay. But COVID-19 is like a rehab intervention that breaks the addictive hold of normality. To interrupt a habit is to make it visible. It's to turn it from a compulsion to a choice. And that was one of my, I have to put the piece of paper down and go, whoa. Like, once you're aware of that, you can't not see it. You know, it changes the way that you're really looking at the world and recognizing, good God, we were really in so many habitual behaviors, weren't we?
Yeah, I think we are, and it's driven by a very consumerist, capitalist world. You know, the economy is the measure of a country's health and well-being. Compared to somewhere like Bhutan, whose, you know, happiness and well-being is a measure of the country's success and growth. But yeah, I think it's about redefining what we measure, what we define as successful as a nation and as a world. But look, the other thing that I really feel like we are being called to break that addictive pattern, and we're being given this space. And he talks a lot in the paper about not knowing and being okay to not know and to say I don't know and I don't have the answers, because, you know, being comfortable with getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is the hardest thing for us to do. And so, you know, there is a space, and I was writing about this in a blog today, and Viktor Frankl had this beautiful quote, and I'm a big fan of Viktor Frankl's work. And
I love this quote. It's one of my favourites.
His quote is, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And to me, that is exactly what that quote from Charles is saying, is that if we want to change our habits and move from compulsion to choice, we have to sit in that space and actually really not rush to getting back to being busy, not rushing back to the workplace and back to business as usual, not rushing back to, buying stuff we don't need, all of those things. I think we're being asked to actually consider choices, and particularly in buying, in where we're spending our money and how we're using that for its highest good. And I think money is an indicator of what we value most. And spending it on things that are going to be good for society and the planet, rather than things that perpetuate individualism and consumerism.
I think the beauty of that quote is the move that we can give ourselves from reaction to response. I think we've been in a very reactionary way, and as you're saying, that we move so fast. And if we give ourselves the space to consider and to respond, if we allow ourselves that power of the pause, then it can change so many things. But that idea of spending money in a way that is conscious and not binging, like just some of the great examples that I saw in my own community was us really pulling in and supporting local business. That call became really loud. There was even just a simple example on a Facebook post. There was a husband and wife and their 2 wee kids, and the guy talking about that they run a local pizza place, and that local pizza place is suffering at the moment. It's been really hard for them, and it's their livelihood. And so there was a great outpouring of community support who all decided, let's get a pizza on Friday night type thing. And so that was a conscious choice to put your funds to a place where you knew that money was going to be funneled down into a home, into a family, school uniforms, whatever. But it felt really good to be able to use, a small amount of money in a powerful way that would have a really positive impact. So I know that's not a planetary impact, but it still felt really good at the community level. And what was the word that what we had before?
Communitarianism.
Yes, communitarianism.
Well, the trick is, Ange, is that we continue that once things get back to normal.
Exactly.
Like it will be very easy for me to go and, I was writing in my book about, there's a local restaurant here called Moroccan Soup Bar, and it's an incredible restaurant. It's alcohol-free. It has a spoken word menu. It's run by an amazing feminist, Hannah Asafari, who I also have a bit of a crush on. And she redirected all of her workers. Employees are all Muslim refugees. And she's just an amazing woman and runs an amazing business that really ticks so many boxes in terms of its positive impact in the world. And during this pandemic, she has redirected her kitchens towards providing meals for care workers and nurses and so on. So people can go and buy a meal and have it sent to the wonderful nurses and paramedics and the people that are keeping us all safe. And so that's an example of where a business has responded to this crisis, but she's reached out to us for the community who know, love and support Moroccan Soup Bar already to create a ripple effect by buying meals from her in order to be able to feed, hospital workers. So we're seeing that sort of thing happen, and for me that is just like so exciting, and I hope that stuff continues. So when I go to Moroccan Soup Bar after, when things do get back to normal, I can buy a meal for myself, and I can buy a meal for, someone who's struggling or needing it as well, the homeless or whatever. So we're going to see this repurposing and shifting in businesses. And we've seen it because it's been forced upon businesses, but we're going to, again, in that space, businesses are going to be given that opportunity to think, well, how might I repurpose as an organisation? How might we actually pivot our business so that it's more purpose-driven and in service to, humanity?
Isn't that the beautiful thing, is that we've been forced to, inverted commas, like I remember having a conversation with another friend a couple of weeks ago, like we can't possibly stop planes from flying. That's impossible. We can't possibly do this. We can't possibly do that. Well, yeah, you can. And that other quote, the classic one, necessity is the mother of all invention. When we have been forced to change, and when we have that opportunity to actually pause and go, wow, why didn't I do this before? How could I continue to do this? That's really the invitation. It's really the invitation. So it's going to play out in different ways. Like the Moroccan soup kitchen or bar is a beautiful example, and there's many examples up here as well, where in Sydney, where people have pivoted the business and they've recognised there's a woman who's a catering company, and all of her events were cancelled. Obviously every single one. So she allowed herself a bit of like, oh my God, because you've got to allow the feelings to come through and deal with them. And then she rolled up her sleeves and went, okay, how can I use my powers for good now? And it was around delivering food packages to the vulnerable all around this area. And we could get involved and we could do the same. We could purchase a package. And so it just shows, and I know this is absolutely a documented fact, when you do for others, when you get off self and focus on others, there is an immediate upswing in your own feelings of positivity. It's good physically and mentally, health-wise for your body, the whole bit. So this idea of the value of an economy, of a country just being the economy. Who was it that was measuring? You said before, was it Bhutan?
Bhutan, yeah.
Yeah, that was measuring the actual value of the country based on the mental wellness of
they have a gross national happiness.
That's it. I remember reading about it. And I think Jacinda, I love Jacinda. I've got a girl crush on her like half the world. And I think I've rolled out my Kiwi credentials more often than ever since she's been in power. But her approach to leadership, as we're talking about those feminine qualities of leadership, is that it can incorporate compassion. The concept of power with rather than power over is something that I feel really strongly about, and she's a beautiful example of that. So there is so much opportunity for us to just look at those small ways in which we can change and contribute, and I think that's the most exciting thing about this whole scenario.
Yeah, I do too. I think that I just hear more and more examples every day of individuals and businesses and people that are really they have changed their mindset and are making changes. I think in this discussion, though, that it's really important to acknowledge that there are millions of people that are experiencing the death of a loved one or a tragic loss of job and can't pay the rent and can't, put food on the table. We're going to see an increase in domestic violence. Sorry to bring it down a level, but I think it's important that we're not utopian here to the degree that we're not really sitting in the pain that a lot of people are experiencing. As I said, an increase in domestic violence, ill health, suicide. What's the fallout of COVID going to be in terms of mental health and well-being? Isolation, 2 million people in Australia live on their own. And so I live on my own, and I'm lucky I've got a lot of friends that I can walk with and things, but even I've noticed, that loneliness hits in a way that it perhaps wouldn't before. So there is going to be, has been and will continue to be a massive fallout from COVID. And I think for those of us that I feel very privileged, I think that my opportunity is to actually recognise those that don't have my privilege and work out ways that I can sit with those people that haven't and maybe contribute something to them. So, I'm very mindful that we don't put our kind of rose-coloured glasses on about the opportunity of this, because there is going to be an equal amount of pain and challenge for millions and millions of people.
Which is exactly why those values of the compassion and the love and the kindness and the generosity need to be at the forefront, because you're absolutely right, and that's something that we've discussed, and discussions are happening all over the world with the negative fallout. So with everything, there is always two sides. There's always the light and the dark, and we need to acknowledge that both of them are there. And how do we handle both sides? Well, I feel really strongly that, as we talked about, that those values those feminine qualities as they rise, those are the key to handling both sides. Now, I'm talking obviously from an emotional perspective, and I'm not talking from an economic perspective and other things as well, but it's the starting point. It needs to be the starting point. We need to believe that we can affect positive change across the board. Otherwise, we could fall into despair, which that's not a neighbourhood that I want to live in.
No, exactly. And I think the answer to that is still to do things. You know, we talk about sitting in the not knowing and the space and, you know, the questioning and all of that kind of thing. I've always been a proponent of the idea that we learn by doing. And so I think the opportunity for all of us is to actually act. So in community, if you're in community, to go and do things, you know, some simple things like change your bank and invest with a bank that is already doing good for the planet. You know, we're seeing people growing their own food and those sorts of things. So I think it's about taking some action now and thinking about what can I do now that I know is going to help me create a new normal, instead of sitting in this kind of stunned rabbit in the headlights kind of scenario where like we're just in lockdown and watching Netflix 24/7. Not that there's anything wrong with Netflix. I've been watching some brilliant programs on Netflix, but it's a balance between doing, and also I love the idea of finding that project that you've always wanted to do. I talk about it as purpose, but many of us, now that we have more space, we're doing things that matter, like spending time with our family, exercising more, you know, cleaning out our cupboards and thinking about our home, the home that we want to create, and so many of those things which are really valuable. But also inside every single person, there is probably some pet project, a pet creative project, whether that's writing a book or, which is what I'm doing in my spare time, you know, writing a book or learning how to paint or singing or dance or whatever that creative outlet is, or identifying a community project that you've always thought about doing. One project I'm working on at the moment, I've just started planting the seed in my own community, is how we might create a food buying cooperative in our local area. And that to me is a really exciting project. So I think what we're not saying is don't sit in the not knowing and not doing space, but finding projects or things that we can work on that we know are going to be beneficial for the new world, and start taking action on that, because that will mitigate the risk of just returning to the busy badge and the old way of being. So I feel like this space is the chance for taking on something that's of value and that matters.
Well, it's because the space has allowed some contemplation, and things sort of rise up, they bubble up, things that have been in the background quietly calling you, but they weren't heard because of the noise of the everyday, now have the opportunity to be seen. I mean, I like to think about them as purposeful projects. And I know, you know, when I love to hear the fact that you're writing another book. I love what you write. You know, I've got them all over my desktop here. But that concept of purpose, it's got to run through everything that we do. And I think, I mean, this whole conversation isn't about purpose per se, but it is hinted at, you know, in the coronation, it is hinted at as the new way of approaching things with a purposeful, conscious approach, not an unconscious, let's just go with the flow with what's always been. There's that opportunity to question things. I think that's the beautiful part, is the opportunity to question. But, you know, there's one of the quotes that I pulled out that I really loved in here was, as COVID stirs our compassion, more and more of us realize that we don't want to go back to a normal so sorely lacking in it. We have the opportunity now to forge a new, more compassionate normal. That's the one I keep coming back to again and again, because I remember I did I was involved in a program many years ago now with a woman in the States, Amy Oscar. And when you were talking at the beginning about love, which we both completely agree with, it was Amy that first taught me that question, to pause and say, what would love do? What would love do in this situation? If you allow yourself that Viktor Frankl pause and ask that question of yourself, it changes your actions Without a doubt, it changes your actions. It helped me a lot with teenage kids. Okay, I want to kill her, but what would love do? It certainly paused me often. But then I realized how valid that is as a question right across our life and our business. Without a doubt. It's one
Absolutely. And look, we can even ask that question when we walk into a shop. You know, what would love do? Not just in the way we interact with the person that's serving us, but in what we choose. Do we choose the eggs that have been, ethically farmed and produced in a local community, or do we choose the cheap ones that, and I do understand there's often a financial imperative for a lot of people, but it's right down to those daily purchasing decisions. You know, what would love do? What would compassion do? Would it choose the battery hen farmed eggs, or would it choose the eggs that are ethically produced, or would they choose no eggs? So said the vegan. So, I think that it's that choice. And the trouble is that our world has just been predicated on convenience. You know, like everything is, you go to one spot like Woolies and you fill your trolley up and you take it home. And shopping for a lot of people is actually just something that you do fast, you do quickly, you do with minimal fuss and get home so you can relax. But what if shopping became going to the farmer's market with your kids, picking the produce directly from the farmer? What if it was growing your own food? What if your projects were a return to nature, to Mother Nature, and actually food became a beautiful part of your family's sort of existence and DNA? You know, it's that shifting from convenience to considerate and enjoyable experiences, because we're being forced to actually sort of stay at home to do those things. You know, international travel is going to be a way off. Traveling and holidaying for many people is going to be an unknown thing because of financial reasons or whatever. So we're actually being asked to ground our feet right where we are, right where we live, in our streets, in our neighbourhoods and in our communities. And we're being asked to look at what we can cultivate. It means borrowing things instead of buying things first. It means creating your own share economy in your local community. You know, these are where the beautiful, rich opportunities exist right now. And I'm really excited to see the growth of those things in my own community, that's for sure. So it's good times. I'm excited.
It is. And, as we're talking about, the word that keeps coming up for me is reverential. It's like we've been walking around a bit disconnected from everything that's going on. And as you were describing the trip to the shopping, to the supermarket, what was happening in my head was the contrast between when I dashed to Woolies, and I mean pre-COVID as well, when I dashed to Woolies with my list and like bang, 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 as opposed to when I do get down to the farmer's market that's in Warriewood on a Friday and take my time, and the experience is completely different. And I love the fact, I mean, I grew up on a farm in New Zealand, so I've got a connection to the land in that way, and a reverence for the way things are growing and the way animals, because I'm not a vegetarian, I'm sorry if you are as a listener, but to take good care of your animals rather than the factory farming, etc. And I love going down to the farmer's market. So to me, that's the word that comes up. You know, it's making the everyday a little more sacred, more sacred. And all you need to do that is your attention and your awareness. That's what you need to do. And it's that whole concept we talked about before of responding. It's in the same family of values, the same family of emotions.
Yeah. And look, you know, speaking about eggs, I've, one of the things that I've done since lockdown was I found a farmer who lives outside of Melbourne who all his business supplying to restaurants, etc., dried up. And I heard about him and got on his website and looked at how he looked after his chickens and how he rotated the chickens from one hectare to another hectare every, 3 times a day. And I saw the chooks virtually, obviously, not in life. And I contacted him and he said, sure, let's start an egg buying group. And I was his first cooperative egg buying client. So every fortnight we've been getting about 20 to 30 dozen eggs delivered, and I have a co-op buying group of about 20 people. He delivers the eggs. There's zero waste because people bring their bowls and fill their eggs up, so there's no thrown out egg cartons. The eggs he delivered on Friday were laid the day before he delivered them. And then we've all been swapping egg recipes, and then I cooked an 8-egg frittata the other day and dropped off some to my neighbours, and the power of just starting this little egg buying co-op that's turned into creating a community within my own development where I live, or apartment block. So and it's fun. People go, oh, well, that would be a lot of administration. Yeah, that it is a bit of admin, but the enjoyable aspect of it and knowing that you're supporting a local farmer far outweighs the pain of the little bit of admin that goes with managing it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. This is the concept, like giving these great wee examples. Yeah, as I said right at the beginning, is that sometimes we feel like we're just a drop in the ocean. What difference can we make? But we are the ocean. We're a part of it. Everybody is connected. And I think that's what's come up so much. And as Charles talks about in the essay, is how we are all connected at every level. And this situation makes that more clear than ever. And that's a beautiful example. And where's my frittata? They do have overnight couriers.
Well, next time you come to Melbourne and stay with me, Ange, I'll make you one.
I want you to whip me up a frittata. So,
sure.
one of the people that Charles mentioned in the essay was an author, Rebecca Solnit, who wrote a book, A Paradise Built in Hell, which sounds a bit scary, but it was about how disaster often liberates solidarity. And the quote that just gave me the goosebumps is, "A more beautiful world shimmers just beneath the surface, bobbing up whenever the systems that hold it underwater loosen their grip." And that's what we're seeing. There's this more beautiful world that is this slower, more conscious, more connected, more kind world just sort of started to bubble up. And it's there, and it was right under the surface. And one of the things that we discussed was, when we were talking about having the talk, was what businesses matter the most now. Which ones are going to get dismantled? What's going to change? And I think we saw the big Goliath, so to speak. I mean, Virgin's a great example. It was teetering before, but it's a bit of a mess now. The big, complicated, systematic businesses have found this the hardest. And us little nimble businesses can probably respond in a different way. But it's definitely, I don't want to get on my feminist soapbox too much, but I'm damn tempted. But the caring professions, which have been so undervalued in the past, are now seen to be so damn important. And I would love to see that reflected in better pay structures going forward. My fingers and toes are crossed.
Yeah.
Some consciousness will raise there, and we'll take care of our nurses and our teachers and our delivery people and our supermarket attendants and all of those people who really are the fabric of our everyday society that we've seen at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think that we are going to see, or we have seen, an increased value. We've witnessed in New York and in Madrid people coming out on their balconies and I'm getting all teary now.
Yeah,
thinking about it. Clapping and cheering and just, advocating for nurses and hospital workers. And, the trick is how do we maintain that? Like, how do we not go back to just focusing on building the economy? And unfortunately, we have leaders that we have created a world that is on a house of cards. Countries live on debt. Humans live on debt. Our whole lives are predicated on more debt. Kids are being educated with massive amounts of debt before they even start their job. There has to be some systemic crumbling of some of these systems that actually are propping up the economy and that are adverse to building a good society. So I think we are going at a big level. We have seen systemic breakdown, and we are seeing institutions, like we've seen education repurpose itself. We've seen things like NAPLAN being thrown out, which is, for any parents, they're probably cheering when they hear that. So we're seeing systems like education being repurposed. We're seeing banks repurposing. We're seeing fashion industry. You know, fashion is the second biggest polluting industry in the world. If you've seen the documentary The True Cost, you will weep about what our fast fashion choices are doing to our environment and to humanity as well. And so we're going to start thinking about, well, fashion, is it an essential industry? And if it is, what does that new industry look like? So these are really interesting times, and the same with travel. What's going to happen to international travel? Are we going to ever resume international travel with the same lens? And flight, you know, carbon emissions of flights are one of the biggest contributors to our global climate change problem. And so, you know, are we going to see people thinking twice about whether they'll take that international holiday and choose to holiday locally instead?
So this is the whole thing that comes back to the individual, because if we think we can't change it at that huge level, we'd be wrong, because if every individual makes more conscious choices, then the world changes. So it's that whole, I guess, is becoming, I'm conscious of, we could talk all day about this, but we better give our listeners a bit of a break. But the idea, really the question to ask ourselves, I think, is like, how are we going to choose to show up differently? You know, as an individual, within your family, as a business owner, as a woman, like you've had the opportunity to pause. And we're not, as we've acknowledged, we're not saying that it's all been a bed of roses, but there has been, you know, dig for the good, to see that invitation is waiting for you. And how do you want to become more conscious? How do you want to respond with love? How do you want to bring those values forward? And I think it's so much the time for individuals with vision to actually start enacting change. And for me, you know, the realization that I had just on a very personal level when it comes to being a business owner is that I can teach strategy till it comes out of your wazoo, basically. I don't know where your wazoo is, but if you've got one, that's where strategy can come from. But it's the worthiness piece that really rose up so much more strongly for me over the last few weeks, about how important it is for women in particular to own their value, to know their worth, to be really connected to it, because I think it gets screened out with all of the responsibilities and the pace of life and the conditioning that happens to us. And that, to me, became part of my intention going forward, is to really double down on helping women connect to that, because a person who knows their worth, who doesn't discount their value, they will go forward and contribute so much more strongly to the world. And that's what we need. We need the people who want to contribute, who want to make a difference, who know that when they are in full flight, that they can be such a part of that ripple effect. So that's what came up for me, and that's how I'm going to show up differently going forward. How about you?
Yeah, I really like that, Ange, that focus on digging deep around self-worth, because I think particularly for women in business, it does hold many women back for asking for what they're worth, not just financially, but in terms of what they deliver to clients and so on. So there's a whole lot of areas to explore around worth and value for women in business particularly.
Oh, there is.
So
it's like, it just fills me up. And you know, the big part of it, absolutely asking for value, and it's also doing the thing that calls you. Trusting yourself, yourself, going inwards and making the change in your business to do the thing that calls you. And I don't mean like, oh, I'm suddenly going to become the owner of a charity. That's not what I mean. I mean, what is the way in which you can contribute in the most pure and powerful way? That comes from your calling. That's what I'm very excited about it.
That's great. And in terms of sort of where I'm pivoting my own work, is I've noticed an increase in conversations around purpose in the workplace and organisational purpose. So I had a conversation the other day with a head of HR of a company of about 600 people, and she'd just been reading The Purpose Project, and she wanted some ideas on how she might reshape the purpose statement for her company. And I gave her a very kind critique of the current purpose statement and why it wouldn't take them through to the next chapter or evolution of their business. And she found that quite helpful. But we then discussed about what is the best way to reposition and repurpose an organisation so that it just doesn't become a trite part of a strategy day with the leadership team, but so that everyone in the organisation and outside the organisation buys into that purpose, knows it, believes it, can bring it to work every day. And I feel like the work of helping companies repurpose and define their new purpose statement is going to be a massive there's going to be more and more companies who realise they need to do that, and that the purpose is the glue and the North Star and the thing that drives the organisation forward. So, yeah, I feel like there was going to be a lot of repurposing, and my work is going to be pivoting around helping these kind of already successful, well-established companies to repurpose themselves so that they're going to be prepared for the new society and the new economy.
And that feels deeply purposeful.
I know. Very exciting. Also, while I write my next book, which hopefully will be out soon.
We're going to have a conversation about that.
Yeah, we'll have to have a separate conversation about that. But look, I feel like and I think Australia has nearly 1 million small business people like you and me, Ange, or maybe it's about 900,000 of consultants and coaches and people in that personal services space of delivering advice and expertise. And so a lot of those businesses are going to have to repurpose too. So, and that's the evolution of the work world, isn't it? We're not going to be seeing people employed full-time forever anymore. We've already seen that, the gig economy.
It's changed everything.
The world of work is vastly different. So we're going to have to start to think about ways we can earn revenue in multiple ways, not just from our work. So, I rent out my place on Airbnb, and, some people have investment properties, or they might have other ways of creating financial means. But yeah, another conversation we can have is around money and its purpose. Why do we need money, and what is its purpose? Because I think that kind of goes hand in hand with building an economy and those sorts of things. So yeah, fun times ahead.
They are indeed. Well, as I said, we could talk forever. We could. But I think that the place really to sign off now is, to thank each other for the time that we're investing here.
But also,
it's always a delight when we can have a wholehearted conversation about a topic that's really important. And the purpose behind the conversation was we both hope will inspire you as our listener to think a little differently, to pause in that place of, uncertainty that we've been facing, because we don't know where this is going to go. We just don't.
Yeah.
And I think expectations are always dangerous. Like, put them to one side and just stay open. But the opportunity and the invitation is to look inside, to question, how have I been showing up? How do I want to show up? How have I been leading in my own life, in my family, in my community, in my business? And, what change is possible that will align more with those values that are inside of me? So an understanding and exploration of the values that are most important to you, and how they will then be acted upon, how you will live your values as opposed to just being aware of your values. And for some of us, that means a big change. And for some of us, it just means a bit of a pivot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Change is part of growth, and I find that exciting. I really do.
And look, I just thank you, Ange, for this opportunity to do this podcast. You're a whiz at it. I love it. Because I could talk till the cows come home, as I think we both can. But I'd like to just encourage listeners to first start by actually reading the Coronation.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And digging deep into it, and finding some other people who they know, love and trust, who are close to them, to also read the paper and to start the conversation. Because you know, all great change starts with a conversation. It's a very common saying, and I do believe that it's conversations that cause us to reflect. And you know, no one likes to be told what to do. We want to be kind of have our minds opened and hear people's perspectives so we can make our own decisions. And most of us inherently know what's right for us and what's not, or what choices we want to make. So I think the paper really invokes a lot of and provokes a lot of questions. And, yeah, that would be my kind of takeaway, is grab the paper, read it, and
talk about
it. And talk about it with your children even. You know, if you've got you know, my son's 22 and I've sent it to him and said, you know, next time you come over for dinner post-lockdown, let's have a conversation about this paper and what it would mean for your generation, because, you know, they are the ones that are going to be leading change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly why I sent it to my kids as well, because I want to have a conversation around it. And so, yeah, as I said, we'll leave the link in the show notes. You'll get those by going to angelarasmus.com/117, because that's where you'll find the podcast and the notes that go along with it. But yeah, it has like perfect description. We need to have these conversations, because we'll have a perspective, and the conversation with another person can open another door in your mind and in your heart that you can step through that you can't find by yourself. So conversation is always, you know, that crossroads of change. So thank you, my darling. It has been a delight, as I knew it would be.
Thank you. Yes, it's been wonderful. Thanks for the opportunity, Ange.
You're most welcome. And just to sign off, my lovely listener, thank you so much for investing your time and your energy with us. We hope that we have, as I just mentioned, opened another wee door in your own mind and heart that you can step through into this new normal that is coming after this unusual period in world history that you're a part of right now. You may be right on that cusp of your next chapter anyway, and this could have just been the thing, the conversation, the experience that has tipped you over into taking the step into that new reality for yourself. And if that's the case, we are utterly delighted, because you're here to contribute in a unique way that you know only you can. So let's step out from under fear. Let's recognize what our values are, and let's live them every day in our work, and absolutely in these beautiful businesses that we have that are impacting our local community, our national community, and in a way the world as well. Remember, you may only be a drop in the ocean, but you are a part of it. So thanks again, and I look forward to sharing more ideas with you on the next episode of the podcast. Take care. Thanks so much for listening to the Your Next Chapter podcast. I really do appreciate your time. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me on Facebook or LinkedIn. And of course, my website, angelarasmus.com. If you enjoy the show, I'd love you to share it with another woman who's in the midst of business and life beyond 40. And if you love it, a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen in on would be fabulous. Reviews somehow impact that deeply mysterious algorithm and make it easier for the show to be found, which is always a good thing. So thanks again, and until next time, take care.